I'm so glad you're willing to share your story for future generations in your family. And why don't we start with you telling us about your ancestors? Tell us about your parents, where they began life, and what their story was, and then how long they lived.
My parents are the male Antonio, V is in Victory, Pereda, Pereda. It's actually pronounced Perela. And my mother was Isabel. I was spelled with an Isaabel, Isabel. And her last name was Garcia before she married my father. They're from Mexico and they met in Mexico. My father met my mother when he was a young man and he was riding on a horse when he went in a river. He came upon my mother and smiled at her and introduced himself. My mother was at the river washing clothes when she saw my father on a horse. My father and mother came from Mexico. I don't know how to spell it, but it was pronounced Tocaltiche, Mexico.
And they married there?
Yes, they married there.
When did they come to the United States?
They came to the United States when my father was in his 30s and my mother was in her teens. She was about 18 years old.
And so they came to California?
Arizona.
How long did they stay in Arizona? Were you born in Arizona?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I was born in Miami, Arizona.
Did you live there long?
I think I lived there till I was 11.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 7 brothers and 1 sister.
I understand you were the oldest.
Yes, I am.
What did your parents do to make money?
My father was a miner in Arizona, and my mother she didn't work. She was a homekeeper.
Mm-hmm. Was he a coal miner or what kind of miner?
He was a copper miner.
Was that a dangerous job?
Very.
How difficult was it coming to the United States in those days?
It was very difficult, but he was able to do it. It was very difficult because of the immigration.
How did that work? How did they go from Mexico to Arizona? Did they come across the border? Did he have to get a job? Did they have to do paperwork? How did that work?
My father came to the United States walking, and he crossed the border from Mexico into Arizona.
And then he got the
Yes, and then he got the job.
And then he brought his wife over?
Yes, he brought his wife over to the United States from Mexico.
And how did they become citizens?
That part I do not know. I just know that it took a while for him to become a citizen. He was in his late 30s before he became a citizen. He did not want to become an American citizen. He wanted to stay a Mexican citizen, but then he was more or less forced to be a citizen if he wanted to stay in this country.
And did your mother and father leave family behind in Mexico?
Yes, they did. They left family behind. My father had an aunt who raised him, and he left her behind. He was about 4 years old when his parents died.
After he came to the United States, did he ever see his aunt again?
He saw her one time, and I had the fortune of seeing her also, but I was too young to remember her.
I assume your brothers and your sister were all born in Arizona, is that correct?
Not all of them. Some of us were, and some of them were born in California.
How did your parents move from Arizona to California?
My parents moved from Arizona to California when I was about 8 years old.
What part of California did they move to?
Richmond, California.
Okay, and what did your dad do for a living after that?
Well, he worked in at the shipyards during World War II.
Where were you in school?
I went to school in Richmond. I started at an elementary school called Stege, that's spelled Stege, school in Richmond, California.
And were you a good student?
Yes and no. I was a good student part of the time. Then I was not a good student part of the time. I think I remember I was a good student to begin with. And then later on, when I was older, by older, I mean about 12, 13, I was not a good student.
Who was the disciplinarian of your parents?
They both equal the same amount of disciplinary action. My mother went out when my father wasn't home, and my father, when he was home, he would discipline us, but they were both disciplinary.
And when did you start working?
I started, well, you mean like as a regular earner or just as part-time worker?
Anything to bring in money.
I started bringing in money when I was about 13.
And what were you doing?
Shining shoes. I was just shining shoes at bus stops.
Did you bring your own equipment and just go in and set up shop? I mean, were you an entrepreneur at that early of an age?
Yes, I was an entrepreneur.
How much did you charge?
25 cents for shining both shoes.
It seems very reasonable.
It was. And most kids that shined shoes back then charged about 35 cents to 50 cents. But I charged 25 cents so I could work.
So you picked your locales.
Yes, well, I picked my locales, but one time I had a fight with one of the other kids because he told me that I was in his turf and he didn't want me there. And so we got into a fight, and we both kind of didn't win, but we both beat the hell out of each other.
And did you go back to that same spot afterwards?
Not really. I tried to avoid it because it didn't feel good.
So how many people would take advantage of your services on a regular day?
Shining shoes, you mean? Maybe 2 or 3.
And did I hear a story that sometimes you would sing a song? Did they have to pay extra?
Yes, they did, but I still remember the song. It was called Anytime.
Can you share it with us?
Sure. Anytime you're feeling low, anytime you're feeling blue, anytime you feel downhearted, that's the time I'll come back home to you. Anytime you're thinking of me, anytime I'll be thinking of you. So anytime you say you want me back again, that's the time I'll come back home to you.
That is wonderful.
Thank you.
So did you speak Spanish at home?
Yes, I spoke Spanish at home, and when I went out of the house, then I spoke English. My father used to spank me because when I was home, I would speak English sometimes to my brothers, my siblings, and he spanked me and he said, when you're home, you speak Spanish. When you're out in the street, you speak English.
Did your parents ever learn English?
My father did, but not too great. And my mother hardly ever did.
When you went to school, was English hard for you or no?
At first, it was hard. Then it became easier as I got older.
How would somebody describe you as a child?
Uh, I don't know how to actually express that, but I was not too easy to get along with, but at the same time, it depended on the situation. Sometimes I would find myself easy to get along with, but most of the time it was not that easy to get along with. For one thing, I was very self conscious of speaking English and Spanish. So when I went out in the streets, I would also incorporate my Spanish with English.
And do you know why you were given your name?
My father named me because he had a friend named Elias.
At school, were there subjects that you were better at?
Yes, I was better at math,
Okay.
and I liked math better than the other subjects, except for history. I liked history.
Well, let's go back to your shoe shine days. How long did you do that?
Oh, I shined shoes till I was about 15.
As your other siblings were getting older, did you stay in the same house or did you move?
We sort of moved. I was with my family until I was about maybe 13, 14 years old. And then my parents wanted to move because my father was having a hard time finding work because the war, World War II was over and he couldn't find a job. So he moved to Fresno, California to get a job where he could get a job part-time working in the fields.
And you didn't move with them?
No, I didn't. I stayed in Richmond because I didn't want to move to Fresno. I went with them part of the time, but not all the time.
So where did you live when you weren't with them?
I stayed with a family named Granada. That was their last name. And because I had a friend who was my age from that family, his name was Johnny Granada.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like to live during World War II. I mean, I understand there were rations and that sort of thing.
Yes, during World War II, there were rations, and they would issue stamps that would be distributed amongst the families, and the stamps would entitle you to buy. For example, you'd get a stamp to buy meats, and you could only buy that amount of meats. I think it was for the month. Then you could a stamp for dairy products, and it was also applied in the same fashion. You get so much for a certain amount of time in the month.
Those must have been hard times.
It was very hard. Well, an example, if you had a stamp for dairy products, when that stamp ran out, you didn't get any more. So you had to use it very cautiously, make sure you didn't run out and have enough to last you for the month till the next time came around.
And when did you start learning to drive?
I started learning how to drive when I was about 14.
Who taught you?
I worked at a drugstore named Moore, Moore, Moore Drugstore. And it was the responsibility of the drugstore to deliver orders of different products from the drugstore, and they had to deliver them to their houses because it was just the way things were done back then. And the owner, who was Mr. Moore, told me, he says, I got so many products here that need to be delivered to these different homes. And he would give me the address. And he said, I want you to drive over there and give it to him. And so therefore, he would hand me the keys to the car. And although I didn't know how to drive, I would start the car. I would gladly start the car and try to drive the car to the places to deliver the medicines. I enjoyed that part, but I didn't know how to do it.
And cars were using a stick shift at that time?
Yes, there was stick shift. There was very few cars with automatic transmissions.
So you taught yourself to drive?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you for the congratulations, but it was kind of hard. At the same time, it was not kind of hard, it was kind of fun, but it was kind of hard. For one thing, I'd start the car up and it would jump, like, because I didn't know how to drive that well.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure you learned quickly.
Yes, because I didn't want to have that privilege taken away from me.
So do you remember how much gas was at that time?
25 cents a gallon.
We've come a long way.
Yeah, definitely. Now that it's $5 a gallon.
Tell me about your childhood friends.
I had a few childhood friends, but not too many. I remember the ones that used to beat me up mostly, and the ones that were nice to me. Like I had a friend when I was younger, well, much younger, of course, a child. His name's Frankie Thoza. Last name spelled Thosa. He was a very good friend of mine. And we would, back then, you draw a big circle and you'd put the marbles in the center of the ones that you were owner of. And you'd shoot marbles from the edge of the circle and see if you could hit the marbles in the center. And the marbles in the center that you knocked out of the circle, they were yours. And obviously there was fights that took place because of that.
Were they serious fights? Like, did you get hurt?
Just beat up.
So you'd go home and what, put ice on it?
Oh no, I just forgot about them. I'd get a bruise or get punched in the nose or what have you. And that's just the way it was. You just held on to it, didn't say anything. But a couple of times I went home with sort of like a black eye, and my father and mother would ask me what happened to you there. And I would sometimes tell them, but most of the times I lied to them.
Do you remember the end of World War II?
The end of World War II came from Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. He died just before the end of the World War II. But then right after he died, or in that era, the war ended.
And were there big celebrations?
Oh, when the war ended, there was a lot of celebration. People were screaming and yelling and applauding and just a lot of hoopla. Hurrah, it's over. That type of thing. TV did come towards the end. I guess I must have been a teenager when TV came into existence. I was about 13, 14 when it came into existence. And it was fun because before that, anytime you wanted to listen or be entertained by something on TV, you couldn't do that. You could only do it by radio. Like I remember the Lone Ranger on the radio.
Did you have a phone at home?
At first, we didn't because phones were very expensive at the beginning. If you wanted a phone, you had to pay a lot of money for it. Like I remember my father complaining that back then it cost something like around 20 some odd dollars to have a phone at your home.
So
That was a lot of money.
those were the days of party lines, correct?
Correct. I'm glad you remembered that. That was the days of where if you had a phone, sometimes you had to share it with 2 or 3 different parties. And when you picked up the phone, they would announce who they wanted. Like they would say, I want the Smith family. And then the Smith family would get on the phone.
And of course, your grandchildren have phones in their pockets.
Yes.
And when did you start dating?
Oh, I didn't date till I was older, and I dated my one and only person, my wife, who's passed away. I sure miss her. I loved her so very much.
I know you had quite a love story.
Tremendous.
Did you graduate high school?
No, I quit when I was in the 9th grade. I was thinking that they were teaching me things I already had heard before. And I thought, well, I already know that. And so therefore I quit going to school because of that, because some things I had heard. And I thought, oh, I know that already. And so therefore to be honest with you, be an ass and quit school because I thought I knew everything.
And at that time, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
I wanted to fly an airplane so bad.
And so, what were your parents saying about you quitting school?
My father didn't say too much. My mother was kind of upset. My mother didn't go to school. And my mother used to say to me when I didn't go to school, "You want to grow up to be a burro like me and not know anything?"
So, after you were delivering things for the drugstore, what was your next job?
Well, at that time, I was about 15 years old, and about a mile from my house was a National Guard armory. And I went and I lied to become part of the National Guard. In fact, I remember my first sergeant in that armory, his name was Sergeant Kaufman.
And you lied about your age.
In order to get into it, yes, I lied about my age. I told him I was 17 when in fact I was 15.
And I'm sure there were a lot of other young men who did the same.
Not too many, but just a few. I think that I knew about 3 of them that lied, and also they were accepted. Of course, at that time, the Korean War was going on, and there were not too many openings to join the National Guard, but there were a few, and they were accepting young men, even though they didn't even look the age of 18, 17, and 18, which was required at that time.
Can you give me a little history about the Korean War? What was that war about?
It was a war between communism and democracy.
But how long had World War II been over?
The war had been over about 2 or 3 years, World War II, and then this started with the communist war, communism versus democracy.
But you are a veteran.
Yes, I am.
Tell me about meeting Nanci.
Meeting Nancy was unbelievable. When I was 17 years old, I remember I was home alone on a Saturday night because I lived by myself. And I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing home on a Saturday night? And I'm old enough to have a girlfriend, and I was home alone. So I decided to go out on a Saturday night. And I went to this one place called the Paddock Inn, which was in Albany, California. And I went there, and I was sitting at the bar. I lied about my age to get a drink. And I was about 17 years old. And the door opened, and I saw the love of my life. At first, I didn't know it, but when I looked, when she came in the door, she came in with 2 or 3 other girlfriends. When she came in the door, I looked at her, and the minute I looked at her, without really focusing on her, just looked at her immediately, and I said, "That's the one." And she was. I love and I miss my wife so bad. I mean, really bad, really bad. But I took her for granted because I thought that was going to last forever. Boy, was I mistaken.
But it did last for a long time. I think that you celebrated a big anniversary at some point.
Yes, I did. I had a 50th wedding anniversary. And I cannot tell you and express enough how much I love my Nanci so very much.
You're very lucky to have had that kind of love in your life.
It's very true, but I didn't realize it till it was too late. I miss her so bad.
We haven't talked about your music. When did you start getting involved with music?
I started getting involved with music when I was about 13. No, I was about 14 years old. I was going to a school in El Cerrito, California called Portola, Portola school in El Cerrito, California. It was called Portola Junior High School. And I was playing in the band. I was playing the trumpet. I started playing the trumpet when I was 12 years old. And I was now about 14 years old, and I was playing the trumpet. And I was in an orchestra, not a band, but an orchestra, with violins. And I was playing the trumpet. And the music director, his name was Mr. Schuster, Schuster, Schuster. And he told me, he says, I want everybody in the horn section to be quiet because I want to hear the violins. And I was very upset about that because I thought, why doesn't he want to hear the horns? The horns are important. So I would play loud. And he told me, he says, you play loud one more time, and I'm going to kick you out of band. And I play loud again. And sure enough, he kicked me out of band. I started getting involved with music a lot when I was I guess I was about 16, and I liked music.
And so you were a trumpet player. Did you teach yourself?
No, I had a teacher. I started by myself, and I was playing in the high school band, and the teacher came to me and said, you need to take some trumpet lessons because you're not playing the trumpet correctly. So I took lessons from this guy named Johnny Coppola, spelled Coppola, Coppola. And so I took lessons from Johnny Coppola, and I learned how to play the trumpet.
Tell me about your dating before you got married with Nanci. Did you date for a couple of years or did you get married right away?
I dated her for about a couple of years, and of course I fell in love with her.
So did you go to the movies or did you go on picnics or did you go out to dinner? What did you do?
Well, we just kind of went out to the movies once in a while. Most of the time I would just take her out, just go out and take her out, not to the movies, but just in general to walk, hold her hand. Yes, I loved her very much. I didn't know it at first, but I learned to love her with all my heart. And then I started taking her out and holding hands with her.
How did you ask her to marry you?
Well, I was old enough to drive. And I remember I was driving the car, and Nanci was in the car with me. She was in the passenger side of the car, and I was driving. And we were in Richmond, California, and we were going up the main street, which was called McDonald Avenue. And I said to her, "Will you marry me?" And she says, "I'll think about it." I said, "Oh, you're going to think about it, huh?" I was kind of upset about it, the answer she gave me, but she said she was going to think about it. And I said, "Well, don't take too long to think." And I drove about another half a mile. And I said, "Well, are you going to marry me or not?" She said, "I'm still thinking about it." I said, "You're thinking about it, huh?" And I became kind of upset over that. But she did tell me she would marry me. We were, I was about, I was about, I was about 18, 19 years old at the time. And she was, no, I was 19 and 20. And at the time she was about 18 years old.
Did her parents like you?
Yes, they both liked me. Although I don't know if you know, but I'm Mexican American. And both of the parents did like me. They were very kind to me. And back then, it wasn't that easy to be accepted into an American family. But they did accept me, and they liked me. I remember my father-in-law giving me a kind look, but he kind of had reservations about me. Because I remember he asked me one time when I was thinking of marrying Nanci, he says, "How are you going to support her?" And I said, "At my job." He said, "What job do you have?" I said, "I work for Shell Development and Research in Albany, California." And that's where I was at when I got married to Nanci.
So Nancy's not here to talk for herself. So can you share with me something about what her parents were like? Where were they born and what was her ancestry?
I can tell you about my mother-in-law. Oh, yeah, I can tell you about both, as I recall. My mother-in-law was born in Nebraska, and my father-in-law was born back east in Iowa, someplace. That's all I recall. And my father-in-law, he only had a sister. That was it, which was unusual at that time. Back then, when people got married, especially amongst Latinos, it was customary to have a large family. You know, like they get married, no sooner than they got married, they'd have 4 and 5 and 6 kids.
Tell me about your wedding.
My wedding, I married my wife twice. Once in her church, because she was a Jehovah's Witness. And I told her that I wanted to get married in my church, which was Catholic church, which was unusual. A Catholic and a Jehovah's Witness. So we got married in my church.
And did you have a wedding reception with food and that sort of thing?
I had a wedding reception, but it wasn't with food. It was a small wedding reception, like just, like toss a flower, bouquet of flowers, and that's it.
What did your parents think of Nanci?
My mother was kind of like, my mother liked her, but she did not like her because she was kind of envious of her. And my father liked her, but he wasn't sure of her.
And how long did your parents live?
He lived to be 59 years old. And my mother lived to be about 68, 69 years old. And then she passed away. I miss Nancy so much. You have no idea how much I miss her.
It breaks my heart in one way because I'm so sad for you. But on the other hand, I'm so happy for you that you had that kind of love. That's rare.
True, but as you're going through it, you don't know that. You take things for granted. Am I not right?
You are right.
You take things for granted. It's like the old saying goes, you don't miss the water till the well runs dry.
But we all take our health for granted every day instead of waking up and saying, "Oh my God, I'm still alive."
That's absolutely 100% correct. But I miss Nancy so very much. You have no idea how much I miss
I
her. I'm
know.
lonely. I cry at night when I go to bed. I have a picture of her at the foot of my bed. And I look at that picture and I say to myself, oh, if I only had Nancy here. I miss her so much. I just miss her.
I know. And it's so hard to give that up. That's such a special kind of love.
Exactly.
But we have still some happy memories to talk about, like um, after you were married and you had different jobs and you were playing music. You had a very full life.
Yes, I did. But I didn't know it at the time, right? You don't know it. When things are happening in your life and you're that age, you don't think of anything. You just take it for granted. And I took it for granted.
But I bet there's something you didn't take for granted, and that is when your children were born.
Oh yeah. I remember when my son was born. I don't remember if I think I was working and he was born, and it kind of took me by surprise. Sort of, not quite, but it did take me by surprise because I was at work, and he called and told me, "Oh, you have a son," and thank God he's still here. He's now 59 years old.
What were you doing professionally at the time to be able to provide for your wife and your children?
I was working at a shell development and research in Albany, California, and I was bringing in uh, average money for that time to raise my family and provide for them.
Did Nancy work?
Yes, she worked part time. She worked for a while full time, and then she went part time. She worked for Pacific Gas and Electricity in San Francisco.
So when you and Nancy were married, you were married to a very beautiful woman. What
Very
what did you do socially? How did you have fun, and did you go out with friends? I mean, I think you were playing music.
right. That's how I was. That's how I was entertained, so to speak. I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to be entertained and have fun, and at the same time make a living. And the only way I could think of it was playing music.
So you played the trumpet and you sang?
I played the trumpet at first, and then it was until later I started singing. And I started singing for a kind of strange reason. The only reason that I started singing is because I was playing in a band where they had a singer. And I was preferring playing the trumpet as background, but not singing. And one day, the guy that was the singer couldn't sing because he had a cold. And the band leader in the band told me, "You're going to have to sing." I told him, I said, "I don't know how to sing." He said, "Well, you have to, because the singer that we have is sick and he can't sing." So they started me singing. And the first song I sang, I told you before, was "Anytime."
Did Nanci run any of the business for the band?
Yes, she did. She's at that time, you had to belong to the union to be a musician. And in order to be a union member of a musician, you had to keep a log on the earnings. So she kept the log on how much each musician was paid. I did not want to do it. I told her, "You're going to have to do it, Nanci." And so she did. But she didn't especially care for it either because it was a chore.
But I bet she was your biggest fan.
Yes, she was. She was. She really liked the way I sang. I remember when I was more or less forced to sing, I said, "I can't sing." And she encouraged me. She says, "Sure, you can sing. You're a very good singer."
Did you two dance?
Pardon?
Were you dancers?
Dancers? Did you say dancing?
Yes.
No, not really. I didn't like to dance, to tell you the truth, at all. But I realized that I was talked into it, that I had to dance also. But most of the times I was just a singer. I preferred that.
It's very clear all of us here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. The radio and the telephone and the movies that we know may just be passing fancies and in time may go. But oh my,